Over the past week, I dove headfirst into Shadow of the Erdtree, the expansion for Elden Ring, and I gotta be honest with you, of course, can you tell by the shirt, I absolutely loved it. Now, I will say that not everything was 100% up to my lofty goals for what the next expansion to Elden Ring would be, but I think if you're looking at it as a whole, Shadow of the Erdtree is pretty much exactly what FromSoft fans have been asking for, and that is just a lot more of Elden Ring. There's been a lot of negative feedback about Shadow of the Erdtree. It even briefly was mixed on Steam, if you could believe that. But some of the criticism is definitely warranted, and some of it I think really isn't. So today we're going to dive into the criticism of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree and talk a little bit about what are actual legitimate gripes with it and what are not so much. The first thing you're going to talk about, the first thing everyone's going to latch on to is, oh my god, they released a FromSoft DLC and it was hard. Is it too hard for just, the run-of-the-mill casual? And the answer is maybe it's too hard. It's certainly too hard if you're a casual player and you're not using the tools that are available to you. But I think that some of it comes from the misconception that people had walking into the DLC. I know for me, one of the things I thought about before going into the DLC was, how do I make sure I'm not over-leveled? Because that can be its own kind of bad experience. When things are just too easy, you just waltz on through, destroying boss after boss. You barely know what's happening in terms of the different mechanics of the boss and that type of thing. And you can't really get a feel for the game, how it's intended to be played. From Software made the decision that they were going to go in a different direction with the scaling in the, now it's being called affectionately, the Skidoo shards. The Skadoo tree shards, I think is how it's pronounced, although there are things online saying it's just Shadow Tree, whatever. I'm going to call them Skidoo shards, but these things make a huge difference in your power in the game. And I think what a lot of people did initially was run in there thinking, I'm level 150, I'm level 200, I'm level 300, I'm way over leveled. I should just be able to waltz in here and destroy everything. And they get jumped by that first really fast enemy with the two blades that does all the spins and gets killed. Or they go and they fight that first Everjail boss that's right near the start and has that rapid fire crossbow, and they get one shot or they get gunned down and they think, well, what the hell? I've got 60 vigor. Why am I getting destroyed? Or they walk up to the first furnace golem and it absolutely destroys them with a couple of jumps. And I gotta be honest with you, when I first went into the game and I started running around, the first boss that I actually ran into was Rolana. And I gotta be honest with you, she kicked the hell out of me. She was super hard. And I don't think that there's a whole lot to make her easy, but certainly it feels bad when you're not doing much damage to the boss and they do a ton of damage to you. And Rolana does an absolute metric ton of damage. So what did I do? The same thing I did in Elden Ring. Go somewhere else. Start trying to find those Skidoo shards and level yourself up. And they really do make a huge difference. By the end of the game, I got into the final boss, which we won't talk about yet, but I'll give you a heads up because we will talk about the final boss. But when I got to that boss, I ended up trying to find all of the little bits and bobs, all the different bosses that I had missed, and do sort of like a cleanup round going around the map. For one, because the final boss was kicking the hell out of me, and for two, because I wanted to get a complete experience of all that Shadow of the Erdtree had to offer. So I started going around, I picked up pretty much every single Skidoo shard that I had missed, got my blessing up to 20, and then I was absolutely destroying these bosses. There are some of them that seemed super cool, and I don't know, I killed them so fast that I didn't really learn much from their moveset. And I think that this is what From Software was trying to avoid with this system, was avoiding having overpowered characters just come into this world and destroy these bosses that they've spent so much time creating. So they created this sort of a slanted percentage rating system. So without the Skidoo shards, you are at, a much lower level effectively. In fact, they show this in the menus. There's like two different numbers. There's the number that's your base number from your statistics. That would be as if you were in the base game. And then there is sort of a ratioed number that's like in a gold color. And that's what your actual effective numbers are for each of those stats in Shadow of the Erdtree. And basically what the Skidoo shards are doing is they're giving you back your power. They're giving you back percentages of your power over time. So if you run into the first couple bosses and you've only gotten a couple of those upgrades, yeah, you're going to be hurting. They're going to do a ton of damage to you and you're going to do no damage to them, and it's going to seem super, super hard. So they had to come up with a solution. It was the Skidoo shards, and to be honest with you, I can't think of a much better option other than just ramping up the difficulty. But the problem is, if it was a level-based thing, then the answer would be to go and farm. And I think between farming or searching the map and finding these shards, they picked the better system, in my opinion. Yes, if you don't explore and you go boss to boss to boss and you only pick up a few levels of these shards, you're going to be in a world of hurt. The second part to this and the difficulty conversation has to do, obviously, with summons and spirit ashes. I am one of those players that I pretty much refuse to use spirit ashes. I did make one exception in this game. In general, I'm one of those nut jobs. I don't like using summons when it comes to taking down a boss. If it's like trash mobs or if it's just a repeat of a boss that I've already fought and it's just out in the world and it's preventing me from getting further in the game and I just don't feel like investing a ton of time beating it, yeah, I might use a summon. But in terms of fighting major bosses, I am one of those freaks that does not want to use the summons. That being said, when From Software is balancing their bosses and balancing the game, they do kind of have to balance it with a player who's using all those tools in mind. Because again, if it was just like stupid easy to drop down a mimic tier and summon these 2 NPCs that assist you, and you could sit back, do nothing, and kill the boss, I mean, what kind of experience is that? So From Software in this system is trying to balance both elements. Balancing for the casual player to make sure there is some challenge, that they can't just walk over everything by using every tool, and sort of balancing for the player who's going to go in there, a nut job like me, like so many out there, and not use any of these tools practically to assist them. I think maybe there are some better solutions out there, but I can't argue with it because my only regret was actually not leveling more, just so I could have some more points to put in, so I could try out more weapons in the DLC. So ultimately, that's my mistake, but I was under the impression that my character was already leveled up high enough. I am going to go through again with my first character who's on New Game Plus and is a much higher level, and I think that might be a little different experience because now I understand what those shards do and how important they are. So I'm going to do a little kind of test run later on with that to test some theories I have about the difficulty of the game and the difficulty scaling. That's for another video. So is Shadow of the Erdtree hard? Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. There are many things that make it more and more challenging, but I think misunderstanding the scaling system and not utilizing the tools that are available to the player are two things that are going to amp up the difficulty, like, I don't know, multiplicatively. So is it hard if you use all the tools? I don't think it's going to be all that hard if you have played through a lot of these Souls games. There is, I think, generally a fairness to the bosses with a couple of notable exceptions, one of them being the final boss of the game. Okay, let's continue with the gripes that I actually do agree with for Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, I played on PS5, and I do have a variable refresh rate TV that I hook into. So to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't know until Digital Foundry just released their review with the look at the actual frame rates and the frame timings that there were frame rate issues in the game. I actually thought it was pretty darn smooth. You can kind of tell that there's a little bit of a struggle just because of the open world nature of the game and how much it's processing. It definitely pushes the PS5 to its limits, but it wasn't that noticeable, to be perfectly honest with you, as I was playing through the game. Maybe it's worse on someone who doesn't have a VRR TV, but I don't know. I can't answer that for you. For me, the performance on PS5 was totally fine. Now, where this game struggles and where so many games struggle is on PC. PC, the first mistake they made, which they just corrected with a patch, I think it came out last night or this morning or something like that, was that it defaults to ray tracing on. Now, anyone who knows anything about ray tracing, it looks good, but it absolutely kills frame rates. So that was the first thing I thought about when people started talking about the performance of the game on PC. But it does turn out that a lot of the micro stutters and jitters and frame drops that were present when Elden Ring originally released are even a little bit more exaggerated now. When Elden Ring released, ray tracing was not an option. So making that the default on top of all these micro stutters and jitters could definitely make for a rough experience. Now, there are some people out there who I've gone through the Steam reviews and they're talking about, I've done everything I possibly can, tweaks and almost, going to hacks and mods, and I just can't get this thing to run. And so they're downvoting it on Steam, basically because they can't run the game and they want to so badly. And for those folks, I feel for you. I mean, if you are having such a bad experience with performance that you cannot play the game and it's sitting right there for you, you already paid for it, yeah, okay, that deserves a downvote. I do think that there will be some more patching on this. FromSoft can make some progress, but it is a little bit disconcerting that the original issues with the game on PC are still present for many people who are playing. Now, that's before you start to take into consideration modern options in terms of graphics cards like the NVIDIA cards that can now do frame generation and some other tweaks that could make this a more playable thing. I certainly hope that they can take steps to rectify this PC situation, but it is a little bit frustrating for me as a fan of Elden Ring, as a huge fan of From Software, to see a mixed review on what I think may be the greatest game ever released. There is certainly an argument to be made that Elden Ring is the most ambitious and best game that has ever been released, and that Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, may be the greatest DLC ever released on top of it. And to think that some people who really want to experience that can't because of performance, yeah, From Software's got to do something about that. I just don't know if they can, because these issues have been in the game since it was released with only moderate improvement. But step one, if you're struggling with performance, turn off ray tracing. Like I said, they did an update, so I think they actually changed it from the default, so it should not be on when you boot up your PC. Let me know in the comments down below if you think that I should actually try and install it on my PCs. I've got like an older one, I've got my desktop, and I have now my laptop, which I'm looking at the Steam reviews on right here. So if you want me to test that out, let me know and maybe I could do that. See if there's some kind of tweak or something that I could try and get things running a little more smoothly. So those are the two main things that are getting it downvoted on Steam: performance and the difficulty. Between the two, I think the difficulty honestly is just not right. It's just wrong. Through the DLCs of From Software, the most difficult bosses in almost any one of the From Software games that got DLC are all coming from the DLC. Almost every single one. Without a doubt, the hardest bosses in Dark Souls 3 were Dark Eater Midir and Slave Knight Gale, two of the bosses from the DLC. And then from a separate DLC was Sister Freed, who I would also argue is one of the most difficult bosses in all of Dark Souls 3. I would say that's probably the top three of the hardest bosses in the entire game, all came from DLC. I have already previously made an entire breakdown on all of the Souls games DLCs that were released. I go through all the bosses and I talk about it, and I'll put that in a box up here or a link or something. Hopefully I remember to do that. The DLCs are always more difficult than the base game, and Elden Ring as a base game is already hard. From Software fans were already expecting a very difficult time with the DLC. It's part of the challenge that we look forward to. So the fact that that has been the conversation is honestly a little silly. If you said, you know what the problem is with Dark Souls? It's too hard. Anyone who loves that game would just laugh at you. It's just, it's nonsensical. Now, if you wanted to talk about Dark Souls 2, that might be a little bit different. Spirit Ashes are a huge tool for beating the game and beating bosses. So if you're making the choice not to do it, it significantly impacts the difficulty level of what you're doing. Now, in this case, I think that From Software, who has nerfed some bosses in the past, you can look at their most recent game, Armored Core 6, where multiple bosses were nerfed. So From Software is not against down tuning or kind of toning down these bosses when they're out of control. And coming from me, Souls veteran, loves to do it without Spirit Ashes. yeah, the final boss is a little overtuned. I've seen people beat him. I've seen people cheese him with some weapons that are super powerful and possibly bugged, but I didn't do that. I tried to play with my build pretty straight up, and I just couldn't get through that second phase because I could not figure out what the hell was going on with this character and how I was supposed to dodge it. And so I just gave up. I used the Spirit Ashes, but then I was able to blitz them down, you know, in my first attempt with the Spirit Ashes. So where does that leave that? I still think that Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, is probably the greatest DLC that's ever been released. Overall, the world of Shadow of the Erdtree, how much content is there, the artistic style to it, the drastic difference in nature from one area of the map to another area. I mean, these are all incredible feats that From Software has become basically the kings of. There's an overall experience that Elden Ring offers that is unlike any other game that's ever been released. And despite some of the faults in terms of performance, despite some of the faults in terms of quibbles we have with this boss or that boss, or whether or not we think it's too difficult, it's important not to lose sight of what From Software has done with Elden Ring and with Shadow of the Erdtree, and that is release one of the greatest experiences you can go through in gaming, as long as you're okay with some challenge and with some difficulty. But let me know in the comments down below, what's your take on the difficulty of Elden Ring? Also, have you had issues with frame rate and performance? And should I go through with purchasing Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree on PC and try it out on some different setups and see what I can do as far as figuring out ways to smooth out the frame rate on PC? But anyway, that's going to do it for today. So as always, I'm Pyrus or Pyrus Gaming saying thank you for watching, and until next time, I will see you there.